Hello, everybody. My name is Gabby. I am our Community Education and Outreach Coordinator here at Legal Aid. With us today, we have one of our attorneys, Megan Neal, who's going to be talking to you guys about SSDI and SSI basics. If you're unfamiliar with our Listen and Learn presentations, what's going to happen is Megan is again going to be talking to you today about SSI and SSDI, and that's going to be like the ins and outs of the process and the appeals, things like that. We're going to go through the entire shebang. It won't take too long. We are just here until 4:30 at the latest, so do keep that in mind if you've got time constraints. Additionally, at the end of the PowerPoint presentation from Megan, we're going to have a chance for questions. If you are viewing on Zoom, you can put your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And if you're on Facebook, they can go into the comment section either below the video or to the right of the video, depending on the device you're watching from. We do ask that your questions remain general. Megan's an attorney, but she's not your attorney. So what that means is we can't answer anything specific to you or your individual legal situation in this format. We can do clarifying questions. If you hear something in the presentation and you're like, wait, I need you to recap that. We can absolutely take care of those things. But if it's about like your specific situation with the SSI or SSDI process, we may not be able to get to that in this format. And we're going to go into that in more detail as time goes on. But do know that you can put your questions into the Q&A box and we will get to them at the end. So stick around for that. Additionally, I want to throw out there for everybody that if you have to leave at any point during the presentation, don't freak out. This is being recorded and is posted to our Facebook page immediately after the session ends today. So you'll be able to view the recording there at facebook.com/legalaidnc, and that'll be available forever. So if at any point you want to go back, you can do it then too. But with all that being said, again, I'll talk to you guys during the Q&A at the end, but I'm going to pass it over to Megan now to get us started.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So you are here today because you want to know more about federal disability benefits from the Social Security Administration. And specifically, we're talking about supplemental security income, SSI, and Social Security disability income, SSDI. And we are talking specifically about those benefit programs as it relates to adults. Last month, I talked a little bit about the applications and appeals process and some of the non-disability criteria for those benefits like work history, income, resources, that kind of thing. So go check that out if you want to learn more about that. And today, what I specifically wanted to talk to you all about is the medical standard for disability that the Social Security Administration uses. So no matter what stage of the application or appeals process you're in, this is the medical standard that the decision maker from the government is going to be using to determine if you are medically disabled. So here we go. So this here is the definition of disability that's in the Social Security regulations. I did go over this last month too, but we're going to dive into it a little bit more today. So the Social Security regulations define disability as the inability to do any substantial gainful activity by reason of any medically determinable physical or mental impairment, which can be expected to result in death or which has lasted or can be expected to last for a continuous period of not less than 12 months. So there's a lot in there. There's some legalese. So we're going to try to break it down a little bit. So the Social Security Administration uses what they call a 5-step sequential evaluation process. So essentially there's 5 questions they're going to be asking in order to determine if you're disabled. And so they're sequential, meaning they go in order one after the other. So I'll give you a quick overview right now of what those are, and then we'll go into a little bit more depth about a few of them. So the first step, the first question that's asked is the claimant engaging in substantial gainful activity? And so what this means are you currently working? And if you is the income that you're making above the income threshold that the government sets? And that's called SGA, substantial gainful activity. So this is going to be a dollar amount, and it changes every year. So for 2024, if you are a non-blind individual, it's $1,550 a month. For a blind individual, it's $2,590. You can find these amounts pretty easily on the SSA.gov website because they change every year. So you might need to look up past years, or if you're watching this in the future, you might need to look up your current year. So if the answer is yes, so you are making above that income level, unfortunately, the Social Security Administration will find that you are not disabled. If the answer is no, then you can move on to the next step of the sequential evaluation process. So step 2 is, in this step, they want to make sure that you have a severe impairment or combination of impairments that meets their duration requirement. So what this means is they want to make sure you have a medical diagnosis from an acceptable medical source. So that's like a doctor or a psychologist, et cetera, that at least minimally affects your ability to engage in work activities. So this condition also must have lasted or be expected to last for 12 months, or unfortunately to result in death. If the answer is yes, then you're going to be able to move on to the third step. So the third step is, does your medical condition meet or equal one of the Social Security Administration listings? So the SSA has published listings of all these different medical conditions with really specific criteria attached to them. And so if you meet one of those, they will find that you are medically disabled at this step. And actually, if you meet a listing, then you don't have to move on to the other steps in the sequential evaluation process. We're going to talk a little bit more in depth about this step 3, in a minute. But if you don't meet a listing, that is okay. And and in fact, a lot of people don't meet one of these listings because they're pretty strict criteria. So if you don't meet a listing, it's okay. You can move on, and then hopefully you'd be able to win at step 5. Okay, so before you move on to the next step, the Social Security Administration is going to have to determine what's called your residual functional capacity. This is the most that you can do based on your physical and mental impairments. The reason they need to determine this now is because they're going to use this, like your RFC, they're going to use it for the next steps 4 and 5. So step 4 is, given your RFC, do you have the ability to perform any of your past relevant work? So they're going to look at your past relevant work, and they're going to compare that with your RFC and say, are you still able to do that work that you did in the past? We're going to go into this a little bit more, kind of unpack the definition of past relevant work in a second. If the answer is yes, you can do your past relevant work, then unfortunately, they're not going to find that you are disabled. If the answer is no, you cannot do your past relevant work, they're going to move on to the fifth and final step. So the fifth step asks, considering the medical vocational factors in your case, can you make an adjustment to other work that exists in significant numbers in the national economy? So the other medical vocational factors that are relevant are things like your age, your skills, your education level. And can you do any other work that exists in the national economy based off of your RFC and those medical vocational factors? So another way to think about that is, are there any jobs that you can do on a sustained basis given your physical and mental limitations? And we'll talk about this more in a second too. If the answer is no, there aren't any other jobs in the national economy that you can do, then you do meet the definition of disability that's set by the Social Security Administration. So now let's go into some of these steps in a little bit more depth. So step 3, again, this is the step about the listings. So the listings are divided up into 14 different body systems that the Social Security Administration has sort of organized it in this way. And so examples of the body systems, musculoskeletal, respiratory, mental disorders, immune systems, those kind of large categories of potential disability. And so each of these 14 systems contain within them specific conditions. And then each condition has a bunch of different criteria that you have to meet in order to meet that specific listing. I have a link here to the listings so you can kind of look at all of them to get a sense. And you also can just Google SSA listings and they'll come up pretty quickly. But I actually have an example on the next slide just to kind of get a better idea of what a listing looks like. So this is a listing that I've worked with a lot. 1.15 disorders of the skeletal spine resulting in compromise of a nerve root. So in other words, there's something wrong with your back and it's affecting your nerves in some kind of way. We're not going to go into this. We're not going to really unpack this listing too much, but just to kind of look at the really, really specific things that they're looking for here. So at the beginning, they have the signs and symptoms they expect that you would have to meet this listing. And then they also, next, they want to see findings on imaging. So that's like x-rays and MRIs, that kind of thing. And then finally are the functional limitations that they would expect to see with this particular condition. And something to keep in mind with all of this is the main source of evidence that they're using is your medical records and hopefully maybe also some opinions from your doctor. So this should all be present in your medical records if you want to meet this listing. So you can see how it's just really specific and it's often meeting a listing is a really high standard for really having a severe medical condition. But it is possible that you might have a back condition that wouldn't meet the listing, but could still be found to be disabling at step 5. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. So before we move on to step 4 or 5, the Social Security Administration is going to have to determine what your RFC is. So again, it's an assessment of an individual's ability to do sustained work-related physical and mental activities in a work setting on a regular and continuing basis. And an important thing to remember is the SSA defines regular and continuing. So that's 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, or an equivalent work schedule. So not part-time. This is full-time, regular and continuing work that is ongoing. The RFC considers only functional limitations and restrictions that result from an individual's medically determinable impairment or impairments. And the RFC is not the least you can do despite your limitations or restrictions, but it's actually the most that you can do. So the SSA is going to come up with your RFC by looking at both your exertional limitations and your non-exertional limitations. So exertional limitations is about an individual's limitations in physical strength, and it defines their abilities to perform each of the 7 strength demands. So that's sitting, standing, walking, lifting, carrying, pushing, pulling. And then the other element is non-exertional limitations. So those are all physical and mental limitations and restrictions that are not reflected in the strength demands. So postural, things like stooping, climbing, manipulative, reaching, handling, using your hands, visual, communicative, like hearing and speaking, environmental, or there's certain fumes that you can't be exposed to in the environment, or there are certain noises that you can't be exposed to. And then, of course, mental limitations. Things like understanding and remembering, responding to the supervisors, that kind of thing. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about past relevant work and what that means. So remember, the question for step 4 is, does the claimant have the capacity, also known as the RFC, to perform their past relevant work? If they can perform their past relevant work, they're not disabled. And the inquiry stops there. If they cannot perform their past relevant work, then you're going to move on to step 5. And there is actually a brand new rule that's going to be helpful here for us to help us understand what past relevant work is. So it used to be work done within the past 15 years. But as of next month, they've changed it. So it's work done within the past 5 years. So this is a big change. And it's a great change. And so it will make it so that they're not able to say that skills you acquired in the past and things you did at a job over a decade ago are relevant to the jobs that you can do now. So the Social Security Administration is kind of trying to acknowledge the rapidly changing pace of work today. Past relevant work also must last long enough for the claimant to learn how to do it. And the new rule also says that past relevant work has to have lasted for more than 30 days. So if you worked 15 days, realize that you couldn't keep working, that's not going to count as past relevant work. So step 4 is one of the reasons why these work history forms that the Social Security Administration asks you throughout the process of applying and appealing, the forms that they ask you to fill out are really important for you to fill out completely and accurately. And when you're filling out the work history report form, you want to really have an eye toward what was the most that you were doing at that job. For example, if you had to lift 20 pounds if you had to frequently lift 20 pounds and occasionally lift 50 pounds, make sure to accurately report that. Don't leave out the 50 pounds just because it was occasional. And then this is because, remember, if you are currently unable to perform your past relevant work, you can move on to the next step of the process, and which is how you hopefully would be able to win your case if you were unable to meet a listing at step 3. And I have here just an example of what that form looks like. So you can see they're asking detailed questions about the work that you did in the past. So you can see they're asking, how much were you paid? What was the name of the job? Describe it. What did you do at this job? How many hours were you walking, standing, sitting, lifting, carrying? What was the heaviest weight you carried? So there's a lot of detailed questions in these forms, and you just want to always make sure that you're really filling them out completely and accurately, because they are relevant to this process. So this is the 5th step, your final step. So this step asks whether the claimant can perform other work that exists in significant numbers in the regional or national economy, considering her RFC and the vocational factors like age, education, literacy, work history. So the SSA uses something called the Medical Vocational Guidelines, and we also sometimes call it the grids in short. And they use these grids to assess a person's exertional impairments, and you can find these online also just by Google SSA vocational guidelines grids, and it will probably come up. And it's important because after the age of 50, then 55, then 60, when the rules change, it actually becomes easier to win your case because the SSA assumes that it's easier to adjust to it's harder, to adjust to the physical demands of a workplace as you get older. And if you look at the grids, they were a little too complex for me to include in the PowerPoint today. But if you look at those, you can kind of get a sense of what I'm talking about there. And It's at step 5, it's the Social Security Administration's burden to prove that these jobs exist. Specifically, the jobs exist that you are still able to do with your RFC. And the way they do this, if you're at a hearing, the way that they do this is by typically they will have someone who is a vocational expert testify at the hearing, and they will be able to tell the judge at the hearing if there are any jobs that you can still do with your RFC. And that's kind of a little too much to get into today, but maybe in a presentation in the future, we'll kind of go through exactly what an ALJ hearing looks like. So that is all I have today. I hope you've learned a little bit about how the SSA adjudicator will review your disability case. And just as a reminder, last month we talked about the application and appeals process, so you can kind of go back to those if you need to. And then today we're kind of building on that, talking about the medical standard that's used in all stages of the application and appeals process. So yeah, if you guys have any questions about anything I went over today, feel free to drop them in the chat. And then I'd also be interested to know what kind of SSI or SSDI topics you want to learn about. It's a really big program, and there's so much we could talk about and learn about with respect to the Social Security Administration. So let me know if there's anything else you want to learn about. And if you need, if you want someone to evaluate your Social Security case for representation, if you have an upcoming hearing or any other kind of legal issue related to the Social Security Administration, I put our helpline number up in there, and you can also go to our website.
Awesome. We have our first question coming in right now. This person asks, how long does the process take usually?
So, I mean, it really depends. It really depends what stage of the appeal you're at. If you do have to appeal, it depends on if your application is approved at the initial application level, or if you have to have a hearing. But the whole process can take several months at the very least. And it goes up from there if you have to appeal to the next levels of appeal.
Awesome. This person's asking whether or not the recording will be available. Yes, it will. It is actually already available. So if you need to go back and review any of the content, say you joined late, you want to get a refresher on something that happened at one point or another, or if, a couple months from now, even you're like, oh, that was a really great presentation. I need to go back and re-listen to that. It's all going to be available from now until forever on our Facebook page. So you can find that at facebook.com/legalaidnc. You do not need a Facebook account in order to view the video. You just need access to the internet. So again, that's facebook.com/legalaidnc. The next question says, what are the most common reasons that individuals get denied for Social Security?
Oh, I don't really have the data about what's the most common, but I think the types of cases that we see a lot are the Social Security Administration thinking that there's not enough medical evidence to support the person's claim of disability. Sort of exactly what we talked about today. That's something we see a lot, but I don't know exactly like what would be the most common reason.
All right. Do we have any other questions, comments, concerns? I'm not seeing any on Facebook, so I'm gonna come back to the Zoom. Okay, so there's one more person that said yes, so they're gonna have more questions coming in. Cool, 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 cool. One person says, what is the difference between SSI and SSDI?
That's a great question. I went over this in depth in my presentation last month. So I think that would probably be a good thing for you to look at to get more info about that because there's definitely a few differences that we could go into.
Awesome. Um, Next person says, what can I do if my claim has been pending more than a year?
Well, it would depend which level of appeal you're at, but since that is kind of a fact-specific situation, that would be really specific to your individual case. You can give our office a call and we can see if that's a type of case that we would be able to give you advice about.
Awesome. All right. Do we have any more questions? Don't forget to, we also do want to hear from you if there's anything you want to make sure that we're focusing on in these presentations that you think maybe we didn't cover, or if there's something specific where you're like, yeah, I'd like to learn more about, X topic as it pertains to SSI or SSDI, toss that in there as well. This person is asking if we can still help if they're in Virginia. Megan, would you like to take that?
Sorry, what is it?
They're asking if we can provide services, legal services for people living out of the state of North Carolina.
Oh, no, we can't.
While we wait to see if any more questions come in, I'm going to remind everybody the recording is going to be available immediately, starting, right now on our Facebook page at facebook.com/legalaidnc. Also, if you have any interest in any of our other listen and learn presentations, you can sign up to view those either at Eventbrite, which is probably where a lot of you found this information, or found this session, I should say, or on our website at legalaidnc.org/clinics. Again, that's legalaidnc.org/clinics. We offer presentations on SSI, SSDI. We do Medicaid rights and eligibility, food stamps, or SNAP 101. Occasionally, we do tenants' rights presentations, child custody and simple divorce. And I think the last one that we offer is criminal record expunction. So there's a handful of topics that you can come and check out at any point. And, we would love to see you there. This person is asking if we have anybody that we would refer them to in Virginia.
I don't know very well about the legal services landscape in Virginia, but I think you could try to do some internet searching. You could maybe Google Legal Aid Virginia or Legal Services Virginia.
Any other questions? Going once, going twice. All right, we're gonna take one more and then we're gonna call it here, folks. We've got final question says, what steps are recommended for someone who is experiencing homelessness to gain access to SSI when they have limited literacy and ability to internet access?
That's a good question. There's a program called SOAR, SOAR, that I think could be pretty helpful for someone in that situation. I don't have the contact info right in front of me right now, but that would be a good thing to look into for a person in that situation, the SOAR program.
Alrighty. Well, Megan, is there any last updates, tidbits, anything you'd like to give to our viewers before we sign off for the day?
I don't think so. Thank you.
Awesome. All righty. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to Megan for presenting, and we will see you guys in the next one. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks.